all about the Thrift Savings Plan, also known as the TSP. Let's break it down on this episode of the Hawaii Retirement Show.
Aloha, and welcome to the Hawaii Retirement Show, where your hosts Jason and Paul are excited to bring you a podcast dedicated to retirement planning and financial education for all those who call Hawaii home. Both Jason and Paul are practicing financial advisors here on Oahu, and both are excited to share their knowledge, opinions, and unique perspectives as it relates to retirement planning with everyone listening to this show. And now, here's your hosts, Jason Cutitta and Paul McWilliams.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Hope everyone's doing well. And today we're going to kick off a second part of our series for the Federal Employees Retirement System, or the FERS. And today we're going to be talking about the Thrift Savings Plan. Super excited because the TSP is a great benefit for all of our federal friends out there who work at Pearl Harbor or many other jobs. But Jason, let's kick it off. Why don't you get us started with the TSP?
Yeah, excited for this episode, all about the TSP. I think a good place to start would be with a little history. So it's not like I know these facts off the top of my head. I did a little research beforehand. So it looks like TSP was established by Congress in the Federal Employees Retirement Systems Act of 1986. So that must be when it first came onto the scene. And I thought this was an interesting little fact from federalnewsnetwork.com. In 2023, so we have a total of about 6.8 million participants in the TSP.
Wow.
And looks like 88,000 TSP accounts have over $1 million.
Wow.
So you hear a lot about the TSP millionaires, at least in these circles. I'm sure the federal workers out there have heard of these. And yeah, if you diligently save throughout your career, you have a nice long career, you can definitely make that happen.
Absolutely.
So let's start off with who the TSP is available to. So it's available to anybody in the FERS retirement system, which is what this series focuses on, the Federal Employees Retirement System. The older federal retirement system was called the Civil Service Retirement System, or CSRS. So the FERS kind of replaced the CSRS system. And then the TSP is available to those individuals, the CSRS, but it's also available to military members.
Yeah.
So any uniform service, you have access to that TSP as well, which is a great thing. I'm not super savvy on the military benefits. I don't know if that when they enacted the usage of the TSP, if that might have taken away from other areas, retirement benefits. Yeah. I'm not sure. That's something I'll look into. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of federal employees are aware of it. But if you're not, a lot of this stuff that I'm going to be talking about, me and Paul are going to be talking about here, is straight off the opm.gov website. So the nice thing about these public retirement plan systems, all the information is out there. You just got to dig for it. It is a lot, though, and I think the value we provide is kind of providing a summary or some, layman's terms,
taking the
digestible key points. Right,
yeah.
right. Yes, I think that covers the history, a little bit of who it's about. So we'll start off with participation.
Great.
Do you want to kick us off? You want me to keep going?
I think this is great. So, for participation, some things out there. So similar to like a 401k or other types of plans, you are eligible to participate. It is optional in that respect. Highly encouraged to participate. And what you're able to do is save through your payroll. So similar to a lot of other programs out there, it's a payroll deduction. And what you're able to do is you are actually able to get auto-enrolled as well. And as a new hire, you actually get auto-enrolled at 5%, which actually, as we'll talk about today, is kind of like that magic number, if you will.
Sure.
Saving 5%. Gets you access to the total matching funds and things like that we'll break down here. So why don't you go ahead and share a little bit more?
Yeah, so you're right. So starting in October 2020, new participants are enrolled at 5% of your your salary or your wages. Before that, there was a time period between 2018, 2020 when it was 3% auto enrolled. Prior to that, I'm not sure if there was an auto enrollment, but regardless of whether you choose to actively participate, and by participate we mean contribute your earnings to the plan, the TSP and the federal employee service automatically contributes 1% regardless of your contribution. So in some ways, you're always a participant, even if you're not participating with your own dollars.
Yeah, and it's important to know that 1%, because percentages are hard to kind of quantify. Just it's 1% of your salary. Yeah, right? It's not 1% of some other number. It's actually off of your actual income.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of it, and I think it's great that they auto enroll you in the 5%. And I notice even with the Secure 2.0 that passed, that's kind of like it seems like all the legislation is pushing for auto enroll and opt out versus not participating and have to opt in. Yeah, it seems like, and I don't know if that works, the psychology of it, but seems like a good idea.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, I think it does. I think people forget to not opt in, and then they're like, oh, okay, let's just keep going.
And it's the behavioral thing. Like once you get, like, I used to do this anytime I worked at the at Pearl Harbor, and anytime I got a raise, I would increase my contributions.
That's smart.
Because it's like a behavioral thing where you get used to the money you see every 2 weeks, through your paycheck. And if you don't see it, you don't miss it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so it's like getting used to just understand, you don't even think about it. You pay yourself, get it out of the way. I don't know. That's how I approached it.
I think that's super smart. So one of the cool things about auto enroll at 5%, like we said, like you get access to matching contributions, right? We're going to do our best to kind of break it down to simplify it. But the one thing that I always tell participants, whether they're in a TSP or 401k, wherever you are, if you have an employer match, in this case the TSP does, you want to put in at least what I call the minimum amount to get the maximum matching benefit.
Absolutely. And that's just free bonus money coming your
right?
way.
It's basically like, in this case, it's a 5% raise because they're going to match you up to 5%. Right. So as Jason pointed out, so again, whether you put money in or not, they're going to put in 1% automatically, consistently as you work there. And then now as you start to save percentages, right? So if you save 1%, they're going to match you 1%. And then you move up. So the way that it works is it's actually called 100% match up to the first 3%.
Right.
And 50% of the next 2. That's like the language they use. And basically what that means is if you put in 3%, they're going to match you 3% and give you 1 for free. If you put in 4%, they're going to match you 3.5% and still give you 1%. So really that magic number, like I said on the top, is 5%, where they're going to match you 5% and give you that 4% match plus 1 for a total of 10. Now again, to break it back down and bring it back to real dollars, getting to that 5% mark to me is a no-brainer. Now, can you do more? Absolutely.
Sure.
And to me, in some cases you might have to do more. But Jason, any thoughts on the match, how that works?
No, you said it. You got to take advantage of it, and it's always hard talking through numbers in this format. I mean, it's nice that we should have some charts, and maybe I'll put a link in the show notes of a chart to kind of reference it. But like you said, you put in 5%, you automatically have the 1%, and then they're going to give you 4%. So that tallies you up to a total of 10%.
10%.
So you're saving 10% a pay period, into your TSP account.
Yeah, which only is 5% of your actual dollars.
5%, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 5% raised. Everybody, take advantage of it.
Yeah. No, really powerful stuff. Great. Take advantage of that match. So those contribution limits, you can always do more than the 5%. In our opinion, is the bare minimum because that's how you're going to get your free matching, 5%.
Yeah.
But you can contribute up to the Internal Revenue Code. They set these limits, and it's the same limits that pertain to other retired defined contribution plans, 401ks, even 403Bs, 457s, they all hover on these same contribution limits.
Yep.
And so for 2023, an employee can contribute $22,500. So that's of your earnings, $22,500. And last year it was $20,500, so it increased $2,000. And the catch-up contribution, so if you're age 50 or older, so you can be age 50, you don't have to be older than age 50, but if you're age 50 or older, your catch-up contributions is $7,500 in 2023, and that's up $1,000 from last year where it was $6,500.
Yeah, totally.
Real quick, we'll just touch on it. It probably doesn't pertain to most people. So that's your contribution limits. Your employer can still be contributing above that $22,500 threshold.
Correct.
So that's just what you put in.
Yeah.
Now, let's say your employer, you're maxing it out, right? So you're getting that extra 1% automatic plus the 4% match. So you're getting an extra 5% of wages. So your actual contributions for the year will be well over $22,500. It might be $30,000, it might be $35,000, depending on what your wage and salary is. Yeah. But you can go above that threshold when you're cumulative counting employer and employee contributions.
Right.
But there is a cap total.
Sure.
So for those extremely high earners that are getting a match and maxing it out, there is a cap to where your employer and employee contributions cannot go over for the year.
Right. Yeah, and that's a pretty big number.
It is.
And probably for the vast majority of our listeners, not going to be something we worry about. Right. But yeah, just to I
think it's worth pointing out because I think some people might get confused and think, I got to stay under $22,500,
totally.
And they might consider the employer contributions as part of that.
Oh no, absolutely, and I think that's a great correction of how they are separate. So like this 22.5, this is just employees' money, right? It's your money going into the plan, not including anything else.
Yeah,
for sure. But so what are ways that we can save? So in other retirement plans, and people talk about IRAs and like what's a Roth, what's this stuff. So
sure.
So there are different ways that you can actually put those dollars into this plan in multiple ways. So I'll go ahead and just get us started off. First and foremost is like the traditional way, pre-tax way, if you will. So you're able to save taxes today. Money grows tax deferred, and then when you pull it out in retirement or when you start to live off these accounts, it would be taxed in the future, right? And that's a very traditional way. It's been that way actually for the longest period of time. But there is this cool provision that's been added. You can actually start saving as a Roth provision, which is a great resource, and I think something that most employers will move towards because it's becoming very, very popular.
Sure.
But basically, the difference between the two, so a Roth is you're saving after tax dollars, so you're getting taxed on that income today on that paycheck. You're saving what you're saving in the Roth provision. That grows also tax deferred, but when you take it out, it is tax free, right? So there's a big difference between the two, and then the IRS does like this one because they get their taxes today.
Sure.
So there's a big difference on those two, but really important to understand how they impact you individually. But Jason, any other thoughts about the two options or things you've experienced?
No, so you kind of covered it there. Traditional versus Roth, you have both options. Now, your employer contributions, so the government's money that they're matching you, will always be in that traditional bucket. So that's always going to be your tax deferred money.
Yep.
It's just your contributions can be Roth or traditional.
Correct.
And so, I think it's a powerful tool, and it's we won't get deep into the rabbit hole of which is better, Roth or traditional. That's a decision each individual has to make depending on what they have going on with their tax planning. And that's why it's important to really think through kind of what is my tax planning? What are my taxes going to look like in the future? What do I think, government future tax rates and tax brackets will look like,
Right.
and there's a lot of moving parts to answer that question, and it's different for everybody.
Absolutely. And the only thing I'll just add to this is, and we've already talked about this in other episodes, but like RMDs, how they will affect each one, right?
Sure.
So again, just to hit this, so a Roth does not have RMD
Right.
Requirements, but the traditional does, right? So again, basing that off of all your other benefits, that's something to consider.
Yeah, and also too, if you do choose the Roth option, it's not a huge deal, but there is there's a couple rules around the Roth as far as when you can take it. There's the 5-year rule. I think we touched on that in a previous
Right.
episode. You got to wait 5 tax years, right, to be a participant in the Roth program, and that can be maybe you had a Roth IRA. It's just you eventually at some point in your financial life start in the Roth program. If you open a Roth IRA, that starts the clock. If you didn't have any Roth accounts before and you start your TSP as a Roth, well, that now starts the 5-year clock.
Yeah.
It's as soon as you start your first Roth account, that's when the 5-year,
Totally.
rule kind of applies. But not a big deal. And it, if you're saving for retirement, it should be in there for more than 5 years anyway, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, Jason, we're going to go on to a pretty interesting topic, plan loans. What are some of the specifics that go into the TSP when it comes to plan loans and participants accounts?
Yeah, so I'm sure we are aligned in our opinions. It's
not a good idea.
As advisors, don't pull retirement
Totally.
assets
Totally.
for use for other things, right? We like to believe in you earmark. Every dollar bill has a purpose, even if that dollar bill's purpose is for popcorn at the movies this Friday. Like that's the purpose. And so if this money was earmarked for retirement, if you can avoid it, obviously, right? As advisors, we just think, don't do it. But with that being said, the TSP loan is actually a really good option if you need a loan, because you're effectively borrowing from yourself, and then you pay yourself back at a interest rate, but that interest you're paying is actually just going back into your account, and it's usually a pretty favorable low interest rate. Again, I don't want to make this sound too good to where people think it's a great idea. I mean, it's you really want to keep that money for retirement in retirement, but it is a pretty viable option, and there is some benefits to it. Little details about it. You can't borrow less than $1,000, and then the maximum for it is $50,000. And then typically there's 2 types of loans the TSP will allow. One is a general purpose, and one is primary residence. I know guys that have taken out these TSP loans and used it as sort of kind of like a HELOC, and used it for some home renovations and whatnot. And it's not the end of the world. It is, depending on interest rates, what they are, it is, an option. But if the money is for retirement, let's try to keep it earmarked for retirement.
Definitely.
And the other thing, worth mentioning is the loan repayment is done different from other loans in that it's taken directly out of your paycheck.
Right.
So it's kind of like, a forced kind of, repayment through the payroll, which is actually kind of nice, I think.
Right. And something that I'm going to point out, just because, let's say you have a loan on your TSP and maybe you leave your job. So these do get claimed.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, that's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah. So there are some, I guess you can call it called loans, but that's a very specific situation, right?
Right.
So if you have a loan and you can't get it paid back before you leave, you actually earn those dollars as income, which is not a great situation either.
Yeah, that's definitely something to be taken into consideration if you are going down this road. Good.
Yeah, so
good
in
point.
general, I think our thoughts would be, if you can avoid it, try to avoid it. But if you need to do it, it is there as a resource in the TSP.
Sure. Okay, moving right along, let's go to vesting.
Yeah.
So all retirement plans, typically all of them, maybe there's some I'm not thinking of, most of them have vesting.
Yeah.
Whether that's your pension, your 401k, your state pension,
Yep.
And we talked about vesting, I think, in a previous episode. But that's the time you need in service in order to you always can take your contributions.
Yes.
That money is yours. The money you put in is yours, but the matching, right? The matching, and if you're talking about a pension, the pension benefit.
Yes.
That's where the vesting comes in.
Right. No, definitely. So vesting is one of those things. And in this particular case for the federal employees, so FERS, as the TSP vesting requirement, it looks like it's a cliff. It's a 3-year cliff.
So
basically,
right.
you work for 3 years. Since start date, 3 years later, you
right.
become 100% vested.
Yep. Those matching contributions are now yours.
Right.
Full
So
years.
So once you hit that 3-year mark, you're kind of in the good zone for the TSP.
Right.
And then I think you have a couple more years to get vested for the pension.
Right.
But again, once you get vested, that means that all dollars are yours. And like Jason pointed out, the money you put in, regardless if you're there for less than 3 years, is always your money.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then it looks like I've never worked with members of Congress or executive service positions, but there's a 2-year vesting period for them. So I guess certain positions have slightly different, but in generally speaking, the overwhelming majority, 3 years.
It's really interesting that theirs is a little bit shorter than others. I wonder why that is.
Yeah, that is interesting, right?
Maybe
they should have to earn it.
Maybe they make the laws about it, right? I don't know.
Why are they they're getting out a year early.
Anyway, we're not going to make it into this political podcast, but anyway, so basically vesting is really important to know, but most of you gals are going to be, working far longer than 3 years in the system. So
sure.
Just be aware of that. So just kind of working through here, talking through ways to get money out of the plan,
mm-hmm.
Right? So you've worked your career, you've put money in, you've worked hard, you've built up this nest egg. Jason, what are some ways that they can now take it out of the plan? Right. What are some options that they have, and then what are some things maybe to be aware of? Yeah,
so this is probably the most dense area that we're going to talk about. But so essentially, let's say you finish service, right, and you retire, you did your years. Now it's what can you do with your TSP? The TSP set up kind of 3 basic options for you. One is through the TSP website or the system, you can set up installment payments through them. So you can say, I'm not sure if you set the date or the amount, but it's pretty much you set it up on these recurring distributions. The other option is you can just take it all out at one time. Once you retire, that money is yours. If you want to take it all out and do something with it, you have that right to. I mean, that's yours. And in that same vein there, you can take it out and maybe you want to roll it into other retirement accounts that you had from previous employers, or you're going through this consolidation. Maybe you're putting in an IRA. Those options are out there for you too. The last one is an annuity purchase. So you can take that total TSP value you have and purchase some sort of annuity to provide a series of payments throughout your retirement years. Right. And just to kind of reiterate, so if you keep your money in the TSP, you have a minimum, which I think it looks like it's $200 to leave it there. Mm-hmm. So most of you guys, you'll be able to leave it there, so you don't have to move it. But when you start to take distributions, know that there is a difference between setting up monthly payments as distributions and the annuity. Right. So I think that's one thing to really understand the difference. And I think it's important pointing out too that it's not a zero sum game. It's not an all or none. So of those options that I kind of listed out, you can mix and match. Yes. It's not like you have to do one thing with them. Yep. And depending on which type of money you have, whether you have traditional or pre-tax money or Roth after-tax money, any distribution you make, so moving it from a retirement plan to your bank account constitutes as a withdrawal and that or distribution. Right. Therefore, if you have pre-tax, you're going to owe tax. Right. So that's why we talk about, it really is important and we're comfortable with it, but getting really specific with the terminology. Yeah. Distributions, direct transfer, rollover. All these things have slightly different meanings, and there's kind of consequences, or maybe not consequences, but just things to consider
Yes.
with when you're doing each of these things.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
as far as taxes and whatnot.
Totally. Any other thoughts on ways to get money out, or?
No, other than it is subject to RMDs, like you said earlier. So eventually you can't. I mean, because I guess the fourth option is you just don't do anything, right? That's an option as well. Most of the times, retirees are going to need that money for something, right? You have some fun. Even if you don't need it, you're going to want it for fun. But you can leave it there. But if it's traditional, which is the employer match is always traditional, even if you
That's
always
true.
contribute to Roth, you're going to have to start pulling at the RMD age.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So with anything, knowing that whether you choose to leave it there, roll it over, take some withdrawals, turn it into an annuity, at some point in time, RMDs will always be required because the government wants theirs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that's what to do with it, what to do with your retirement account, and this pertains to more than just the TSP. It pertains to our state workers with their 403Bs, 457s. It pertains to private sector with their 401Ks.
Absolutely.
This is a really important decision for people approaching retirement to make. Is what is my strategy to make this nest egg last?
Right.
And you got to look at, do I have secure income through a pension and Social Security? Do I, how aggressive can I be with this money to still earn some return while, managing risks, because you need this money now, right? I mean, you can't take on too much risk if you need the money next year, right? So it's like thinking these things through, really important. Take the time, do your research, but not something you just want to rush through is that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of take off this next two options here. So, if you happen to retire early, maybe you're retiring before, 60, 59 and a half for most cases. And then maybe you got out like in your 50s, there are early distribution things to consider. And this kind of overarches like what we were talking about, the entire retirement, 401k,
Sure.
TSP, they all kind of cover that landscape. So, if you're ever making distributions, so you're no longer working, you've retired from the federal government, but you're still not old enough to take money out, there is an early retirement 10% penalty.
Right.
So if you were to happen to take out money early, just being aware that does exist, that is there. And there are some other in-service hardship types of things that you can do. But if I'm not mistaken, you kind of have to like qualify for those types of things for specific reasons.
Yeah.
But by and large, it's, taking money out while working is a little bit harder to do outside of the loan. And then, but when you leave and you're separated from that service, when you've retired or something like that, then you have a little bit more options. But if you're not at that age yet, right, it's 59 and a half, there are some penalties.
There is still that, right.
So, I think moving on to just kind of concluding this episode, we've kind of talked about tax treatments and things like that. So a question that I get, I'm not sure if you get it, is like, what happens if something happens to me? What happens to my wife? Like, I worked for the federal government for so long, right? Like, what happens if something happens to me? Meaning like you pass away early or unexpected, or maybe, if something was to happen while in retirement, like what happens to all these different things? So what are some typical things that you tell them, or what are some particular rules for the TSP?
Yeah. So, to start off, first thing is, if you haven't already, to our federal workers listening out there, log on to your TSP account and check that you've designated a beneficiary.
Yep.
You can go on there, and that pertains to anybody with a IRA, 401k. Make sure you check up on those designated beneficiaries in those accounts, and circle back to it. Set it on your calendar, your Google Calendar, once every 5 years. Circle back just to check on it.
Yep.
Things change. You might start federal employment at age, I've seen guys start at age 18, 19. And you set your TSP up, and then 30 years later, you might never look at it. You just think, well, that thing's growing. Hey, check back in to see, did I set any beneficiaries? Did I, do I need to update that?
Yeah.
So that's to start off, just check your beneficiaries. If there was not a beneficiary, the TSP follows, a certain, order of law, to where first it goes to your spouse. If there's no spouse, it goes to your children, and they kind of handle that administratively. But something tells me there's going to be a lag and some complication there, and it's just much better off to kind of designate a beneficiary right up front, so you don't have to worry about them trying to figure it out and track people down.
And maybe, and potentially give it to somebody you don't want to give it to, which is rare. Right. So, again, just to reiterate, that's the importance of having designated beneficiaries. And for a lot of these plans, and it's no different for the TSP, you will have a primary beneficiary. So who gets it first, right?
Correct.
But if something was to happen, let's say you're married, your spouse is your primary beneficiary, and just something catastrophic has happened, you're both to pass away at the same time, same event.
Good point.
Right? Put contingents on there. Maybe you have a child, or maybe there's somebody that you want to. You can always add a contingent, and there can be multiple of those contingencies. So there's always ways that you can kind of reduce, transition risk, if you will, or unexpected death in this case. But for the most part, you want to make sure you have that set. And the other thing I'll say is, I think that's a great example, Jason, of, maybe there's someone that gets started at 18, 19 years old, not married, maybe puts mom as primary beneficiary. That's very common. You see that.
Right.
But you get married in the process, right? So,
Sure.
Typically, or maybe you're getting started and you're already married, typically your spouse has to be your primary beneficiary, unless you've allowed them to opt out of that position, which is rare. I don't really see that all that often. But anyway, setting up your beneficiaries, circling back to it, there's so many reasons why. And actually, I think it would be beneficial to have a beneficiary conversation in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a good episode for another time.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of, unless you have any closing thoughts, I think this is kind of a good spot to kind of wrap it up. Looking ahead, I'm thinking we might do kind of what are the investment options within the TSP, maybe in the next episode, and go through the different funds, and especially since they revised it recently to allow more offerings here in the past couple of years.
Absolutely. I think discussing that on the next episode will be a great thing. So, yeah, thank you guys for hanging on with us.
All right.
Appreciate all you guys do, and let us know if you have any questions.
As always, mahalo for tuning in and listening to the Hawaii Retirement Show. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on whichever platform you choose to listen on. Be sure to check out the show notes and subscribe to our mailing list for information on new episodes and more. If you have a retirement planning question that you'd like us to talk about on our show, please email it over to aloha@hawaiiretirementshow.com. And until next time, aloha and happy planning.
The opinions and statements presented on this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Never make any investment or financial decisions based on information offered on this show without first consulting your financial, legal, or tax advisor. All economic and performance information mentioned on the show is historical in nature and is not indicative of any future results. All indices mentioned on this show are unmanaged and cannot be invested in directly. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. Lastly, all opinions expressed by Jason Cutitta, Paul McWilliams, and any guests on the show are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of or are endorsed by ToBA Financial or Inspire Advisors. For Jason Cutitta, investment advisory services are offered through ToBA Financial LLC, a registered investment advisor offering advisory services in the state of Hawaii and in other jurisdictions where exempt from registration. And for Paul McWilliams, investment advisory services are offered through Inspire Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC.